Today we're here with the living legend Larry Zybsko. We want to thank him for making the drive up I-85 and coming to our place in Charlotte. The first question that we always ask an interviewee is how you got started in this crazy business.
How I got started, that even amazes me today. It makes me believe in destiny because I moved to Pittsburgh. I was about 10, 11 years old. First time I ever saw wrestling was just studio wrestling on Channel 11 with Bill Cardell. And of course, Bruno Sammartino, he was like the god. He was the champion. And they had Jumpin' Johnny DeFazio and Hurricane Hunt and all these cool local guys, Slip Mahoney, Dorso. And I sat down and watched professional wrestling at like 10 years old. And I knew that's what I was going to be, as stupid as that sounds. I remember going into like 9th grade, and the guidance counselor, Han somebody, asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up so they could put you in the right school gimmick. I said, well, I'm going to be a professional wrestler. And like the guy, started laughing in my face, and here I was, 130 pounds, full of zits, skinny kid. Wanted to be a professional wrestler like Bruno. Anyway, everything I've done, when I wrestled in high school, I wrestled in college, everything I've done since I was 10, 11 years old has been geared to be a professional wrestler. And so I used my brain when I was young, kind of, thought of the politics. And Bruno lived about 1 mile down the road from me. It was like it was meant to be, like kismet. So me and my friend, we turned 16, we can drive now, so we're driving around the neighborhood, and every time we went someplace, we'd go by Bruno's house to see if he was around. One day we're driving by, and there's Bruno in the backyard. You could see him through the hedges by his pool. And he was playing, throwing a ball to David, and David was about, young, 4 or 5 years old, young kid. So we drive around, and I stop, and I get the guts to walk through his hedges and introduce myself. It was just like, destiny was pulling me into his yard. And, the brainless 16-year-old I was, we're all young and dumb. So, but anyway, off I went through the hedges, and I remember going through the hedges, and Bruno looks up like, what the hell is this idiot coming through my hedges? He stood up, and my God, to see this guy in person when he was in his prime, at like 5'11", 270, 80 pounds, it just bones, big. It was like, it made me believe that saying where Darwinian man, although well behaved, is merely a gorilla well shaved. Because Bruno was just a gorilla, and I was just so impressed with the guy, like an awe of the guy, and it became like my hero, my idol. And I just introduced myself and said, hey, I'm Larry, and I'm going to be a professional wrestler. And he was looking at me like, I was probably like 160 pounds by now, And I don't know, something clicked, and he kind of took me under his wing, and kind of kept his eye on me, and I started working out with him in his basement, and I actually did the same workout he did for years, which is why I kind of developed the same kind of look he had, even though I wasn't quite as heavy. His wrists were like 13 and a half inches. Just big bone guy. And I introduced myself, and we it kind of clicked, and the next thing I knew, I was his protege, and the childhood and all that went just about as fast as the last 30 years did. So that happened a long, long time ago, but that was it. It was just kind of a destiny, fate. I knew I wanted to be. I didn't care about anything else. Going to college was the hardest thing for me because I didn't care. I didn't care about college. I didn't care about being a doctor. I didn't care about being this. I just wanted to get the hell out of here in 4 years so I wouldn't have to go to Vietnam and then hit the ring. And it worked out cool, and that's the way it happened. It was sort of like a charmed, I kind of believe people got like a thing anyway what they're going to be, but I just knew real young.
So we always hear about Stu Hart's dungeon, but let's talk about Bruno's. Did he have more than one guy there? Or?
No, he never had anybody else there. I think right before me, a couple of years, he kind of helped out a little bit Johnny Valiant, and kind of got him started, but it wasn't the chemistry there. Me and Bruno just had like the big brother, father figure kind of chemistry, and for some reason, I was the only one there in his basement. And talk about a workout. We would spend at least an hour and a half, at least, just working on chest. just chest. We'd be in his basement, and he didn't have much equipment. In the old days, I mean, when we started wrestling, in 1972 or 3, whatever it was. I mean, the gym, there was no gyms like every other strip mall. There's a Gold's Gym or a World's Gym with all this good equipment. I mean, you drove around cities, if you found a YMCA with a medicine ball and 2 dumbbells in the dust with a punching bag, you went, oh, workout room, But Bruno's basement, he just had a bench and an incline and some dumbbells that went from 40 pounds to 130 pounds. He had these 230 pounds. And the bench, with a whole bunch of weights. And at that time, when I was 17, 18, working out, and when I got to 20, 21, Bruno was still doing 505. I mean, the free bar 505, boom. I worked my way up to 465 pounds. But we used to, start off and do some reps, and then 4 reps of this and 2 reps of this and 1 rep of this, and then we do our heaviest rep. Boom, I did 465, and then we'd go. What the hell we put on there? 315. He put on 315 pounds, and then we'd take that and see how many. We'd have a contest on how many we could do. I remember Bruno did 22 reps with 315 after he did 505, and I did I think 90. I mean, it was a couple of reps behind him after I did 465. But God, those were the strong old days. We spent a lot of time on that. Then he did those big pull-ups with the bar, like that gorilla, wrestling neck look, and then a bunch of heavy curls. It was. And then after that, then he'd want to go run, and I hated to run. And he'd run up and down the hills of Pittsburgh, loving it. And I thought running was the most boring thing in the world. Give me a motorcycle.
Did he ever teach you anything about the actual wrestling at that point, or was it more just working out?
Well, Bruno was, a very powerful man, and he knew, a few wrestling moves. Bruno wasn't like a wrestler's wrestler, He was just a strong, tough guy, but he knew some, very basic, real good hooks, and all those guys did in those days. I mean, something. They all knew something. They all gonna hurt you some way. One guy would know 1,000 of them, and one guy would only know 2, but one of the 2's gonna get you. And Bruno would have front face locks, wrist locks. I mean, stuff like that. I mean, he was like a bear. I mean, I remember one time him and Dr. Bill Miller got in a fight in the Pittsburgh Civic Arena in the dressing room. And Bill Miller, always thought himself a great amateur, and he was a big guy, Bill. I remember Bill and Bruno got in a fight. And Bill comes flying over at him and makes the fatal mistake of, putting his head down and coming in at him like a takedown, like he's in college. And then Bruno hooked this front face lock on Miller. I mean, now you're hooked by a grizzly bear. I mean, your head, And I remember Miller just tried to, push his way, and Bruno fell back over a chair, and as he fell down, Miller's neck just bent. It's amazing this guy's body springs over. But, yeah, Bruno, I mean, he taught me, the most important thing he taught me was actually just by watching him, but the things he did. He knew the psychology of the people. He was one of these guys that, whether he knew it at the time or not, would walk out and the place would go nuts. I mean, when Bruno, got hit and fell down, people had heart attacks. They didn't go boo yay, they dropped dead. I mean, I remember one night in the Civic Arena, Bruno, I think Professor Tanaka hit him with something. Bruno started bleeding, fell down. Four heart attacks in one shot. I mean, it was a different kind of thing, but Bruno knew how to feel this, and he knew what to do to keep it going. I mean, if you look at, wrestling back then, some guys came and went, and most of the guys that stayed were the guys that owned the promotion. But Bruno, just, kept himself unbelievably over, with the public for, 20 years on top of it. The Garden sold out every month for years. I mean, records. When I wrestled Bruno, the Garden wasn't big enough. We had to go to Shea Stadium. In a time when it was unheard of, and wrestling was on at midnight, and no one 13 or under could go to the Garden. I mean, boy, if we had some video games in them days, baby.
No, someone would win a lot of money.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your collegiate background, because you went to Penn State, And you did wrestle in college?
Yeah, Penn State. It was a short but successful reign of terror. I was state champion in Pennsylvania in 1968 and 69. I went off to Penn State. And I always had a bad attitude. I was not a good college kind of rah-rah guy. I mean, I didn't even like Joe Paterno. I mean, or care about the Nittany Lion. Yeah, I just didn't want to go to Vietnam.
Right.
And then going to college was like really crimping my desire because I wanted to be a professional wrestler. And at that time, as I was getting older, and Bruno was really impressed with my amateur record, blah blah blah. I was meeting some other guys. There was some guys from Wigan I was meeting, and and all the guys would be nice to me because of the politics, because I was Bruno's protege. Everybody was, real nice to me. So I learned a lot of stuff that most guys wouldn't learn because the old school guys wouldn't teach them. They didn't want them to know because then that would cut their own throats.
Sure.
And so I went to college for Penn State. I had a bad attitude, and I remember one match I had in college. It was Penn State, and one other reason I was really mad was when you were a freshman, you couldn't be on the varsity. You had to be on the junior varsity for 1 year, whether you could beat the varsity guy or not. And I could beat the varsity guy, so I'm pissed off that I couldn't wrestle varsity. I'm over here, so here's our junior varsity team in the freshman year. It's like our second match at home or something, and our team is losing. And now I wrestled 191, and then there was the heavyweight guy, and our team got beat so bad that even if I pinned the guy in the first period and ditto for the heavyweight, we still couldn't have won. So I was mad. So I go out there with this kid, and I was watching too much professional wrestling, while I'm in college. So I go out there with this poor kid and do some move and grab him and pick him up on my shoulder and put him down, and the ref goes down, and I let him up and I go, well, you just don't do that in amateur wrestling in college. So anyway, the nice guy I am, I take him down, put him on his back, and the referee goes down, and I let him up again, and I go like that. Now my team and the other team are both on their feet, ready to go, because our whole team's mad anyway that they got killed, and the other team's mad that I'm just embarrassed. I'm breaking every rule of amateur niceness, and they're all up, and the coaches are screaming. My coach is cussing me out. So anyway, what do I do? I take the kid down, and I pin him. But God, my dad's up in the stands screaming at me. Oh God. So anyway, then somewhere along that first year, me and my buddy Joey, I said, I don't drink. I never really drank, and I still don't drink. And I remember the one and only time I ever got drunk was in college. And me and my buddy, I got this thing of cherry vodka, like a quart of cherry vodka. And I remember we drank that, and I got so plastered on that. We wind up at some dance, and Joey starts getting in a fight. And then all of a sudden I'm in this fight, and some guy grabs me and spins me around, so I pop him. Well, as he falls over, it's a guy in pajamas wearing some overcoat, and it's the assistant dean. So down he goes. So anyway, I'm suspended for a year and a half. So I really didn't wrestle all that much in college. I wrestled some, got frustrated, popped the dean. But then I went into the martial arts at that time and did a lot of wrestling with some guys from Wigan, an old guy named John Foley, and he was the guy who actually taught Carl Gotch. He was a small little crinkled up guy that would kill you. Very interesting character. He was like a leprechaun.
You remember your first match?
Yeah, I remember my first match. I was never so nervous in my life. As strong as I was, walking up those 3 steps to the apron was, my legs had no strength. I was nervous as hell. In fact, I was so nervous I probably just tortured this guy. It was only like 18 seconds, but I know I must have just pounded the hell out of him. I was Bruno's protege, so I was going, and the people bought me because there was that similarity, and the whole thing was perfect, and the movement was the same. I actually move a lot like the guy, and the arm grabs with the sim and the boom, and it was just perfect. So the people bought it. I remember it was nerve. It took not long, but one thing that really threw me off, now that I think about it, weirdest feeling in my life. You always have those dreams where you're naked, running down the street somewhere, and you wake up going, oh my God, clothes. feel like a moron. Well, I remember the first day, I didn't even think about it, because you work out, you want to look good, you're flexing, you're pumped, you know, you're going to go out and into the ring, and people go nuts, but you don't even think about it until the first time you walk out, and everybody in the place is dressed, and they're all staring at you, and you've got no clothes on, you just got these stupid little tights, right? That's the first thing that hit me. The very first match when I walked out was, I got no damn clothes on. I felt naked, like you're one of them dreams, and that only helped the dry mouth and the nerves. I mean, I was shot, you know. I think if the match would have went 5 minutes, I would have collapsed.
Let's talk about before you ever got into a big territory like I guess the WWF back then. Did you toil around in, I guess, the equivalent of what independents are today? Just kind of learning the trade.
Yeah, basically, there was a guy named. There was kind of a weird name. There was a WWF where Vince McMahon Sr. You know, basically, and a couple other characters like Phil Zacco, Willie Gilzenberg. I mean, classic old-time promoters. And but the Pittsburgh area was like a separate little territory at the time, where Bruno owned it at one time, and then this guy Newt Tatry, who was Guido the Mongol. Guido the Mongol bought it. But at the time that I was starting, you know, and Bruno would, you know, work at the Civic Arena and wrestle guys for him and stuff. So, you know, so I basically started in a very small territory where they would run like Friday nights and Saturday nights, and then they do the TV live like at 6 o'clock, and as soon as that was over, you'd hop in your car and, you know, drive 30, 40 miles to some high school. But it was the good old days. I mean, it was exciting, fun, and because I started in these little towns where I grew up as a kid, it was cool. It was kind of like being at home, and you know, and breaking into it, you know, the right way. And when I broke into it, because I was Bruno's protege, I was broke into the business the best way, you know, for me. I mean, they didn't, you know, take me in and say, here, I'll put them on TV, and then you watch me, you know, trip over my feet and go, oh my God, this idiot. Because, you know, the first impression is the one people, you know, go by. I mean, you know, I can tell you right now, you know, I can just sit there and watch some guy walk to the ring and tell you if you should get the hook and say, hey, get a job, kid, go home, or if you should say, hey, this guy's got what it takes. I mean, I can just watch him walk to the ring and tell you that. And some of these promotions waste months and years and money on guys that, you know, shouldn't even be in the business. But anyway, what was I talking about?
Other than Bruno, did you have any other big influences, people that really looked after you and helped you out?
Well, Bruno was basically the guy.
Yeah.
And because of Bruno, I mean, guys like, you know, Guido, it was his pleasure to have me work out, you know, at his ranch. I remember me and Bill Eadie, you know, we used to work out together in Guido's barn in the ring and ride the horses around. You know, he was a very nice guy. And, you know, but he helped us out and let us work out there. And, you know, because basically, you know, my friendship with Bruno and stuff. Bruno, he was a big influence. I mean, you know, back then it wasn't like today. I mean, there wasn't wrestling schools and guys says, "Hey, give me $5 grand and I'll watch you jump around." You know, it was they didn't want you in the business. I mean, the guys in the business, they didn't want people in the business. I mean, you have some guy come around and said, "Hey, I want to be a wrestler. I'm a tough guy." They went, "Oh yeah," and they put him in a ring with a guy like, you know, John Foley, and they look at him and say, "This is a little guy." Next thing you know, his arm's broke, and you know, off he goes. You never see him again. They didn't want you around. So just getting in, you know, was like hard enough. And then getting in, like, because the top guy says, "Oh, here, I got this guy." You know, it was big politics at the time. No, I guess it would be just like I don't know who it would be like now. You know, where, you know, there's only one thing going, but. You know, it would be like, you know, Ted Turner walking down and saying, "Hey, look, I got this guy. You know, the guy brought you in." So.
Well, let's talk about when Bruno brought you into McMahon's territory for the first time.
You know, that's a good question. I'm trying to think. I can't remember exactly. I can't remember exactly where it was. Wow, that's a long time ago. I think when I first started with the McMahons, I remember driving from Pittsburgh, this was like 1972, 73. I'm going back to some brain cells. I have to go past some dead ones. I remember driving to some little town in New Jersey. And that's like the first time no, it was television. Might have been television. I mean, it was a long time ago. But back then they were doing television in a little Philadelphia arena, and then like Hamburg or some other town around there. Reading? No, not Reading, a long time ago. Might have been the TVs. I'm losing track here, isn't it?
Well, by this time it was a full-time gig for you, right? This was, I know a lot of people, before they did television, get some other jobs.
Yeah, well, I never had a job. I mean, outside of, you know, like some jobs going through, like, you know, the summer between school and stuff, you know. Remember one summer I was a mover. That's when I decided right there never ever to have a job. But was that a horrible job? Got cramming down the stairs with people's crap. Anyway, but yeah, that was it. That was basically the beginning. I did some wrestling around Pittsburgh, and that I went to New York, and tell you the truth, I can't remember exactly. It's been a long time ago. I might have started with some shows, but then there was a period where Bruno sent me off to British Columbia, and I'm trying to think who was running it back then. Sandor, Zybsko, and Gene Kaninsky, and they had a little thing around British Columbia. What the heck was the name of that town? Oh my God, Vancouver. A long time ago, guys. And then the Brute was there, and Jerry Monty, and guy Donna Christianello, and Tony Rose, and they had the midgets. And so anyway, it was a whole circus. Being an off-I drive. I drive from Pittsburgh all the way across the country over to Vancouver. That was like an interesting 6 days. You know, I mean, you're just 21 and you can't wait to leave home. You get in your new car, bang, and you drive across the country. Mm-hmm. It was a cool experience. And so I go to Vancouver for about 6 months. And Bruno sent me there to get some experience. So then when he brought me, you know, into New York, as his protege, I would have polish, you know, and get rid of the nervousness and, you know, all that Mickey Mouse stuff. So yeah, I went to Vancouver. I remember one time in Vancouver, I gotta tell you because it was so stupid. But this was like, you know, early 70s, and it was the time when Bigfoot was the rage. When there was a Sasquatch behind every tree from Seattle up to Canada, you know, back in those days. Sightings amok. So one day, me and Jerry and the Brute, who was the Brute then, he was Bugsy McGraw then later, but you know, he's about 300 pounds. I tried to fit him in your car, you know. 2 other guys, and we're driving like off to Prince George or something through the Canadian Painted Mountains. Real pretty up there, British Columbia. And all of a sudden we come around this corner and there's a Bigfoot. I mean, this thing is 12 feet tall. It's like this. It's full of hair. And I hit the brakes and I do this donut and almost go off a cliff because we're going to hit this damn Bigfoot. I mean, we all freak out. And then we stop and we look, and behind this Bigfoot is this thing, you know, like blah, 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 souvenirs and stuffed animals. But when you were coming around the mountain from one side, you couldn't see the store. All you saw was this gigantic, they had a Bigfoot and they covered it with bear fur, and it looked like a damn Bigfoot. I almost got killed over that damn thing. I'll never forget that. But then after that, I came back and went to New York, and that probably, you know, was the time they would introduce me on TV in those days. And that would be at some town. That's kind of a blur back there.
Do you remember any impressions you have of Vince McMahon Sr.?
Oh, Vince McMahon Sr., he was, I mean, God, you know, you mention these guys, and you can think back like the old days of the black and white movies, you know, back then. But Vince McMahon Sr. was he was a real classic example of like a promoter of the day. I mean, the WWF was the premier territory of the times. I mean, it was the big money territory because I mean, you didn't have TVs all over. Just in, you know, it was the most populated, you know, territory, the biggest arenas. And it also had what media in those days, all the magazines. And all the magazines were out of New York. So when you wrestled in New York, all the pictures were about you. So, you know, if you made it in New York, you know, and got into New York, that was the place to go to get publicity and get a name. Then your publicity would go, you know, via magazines and talk, you know, and all the other promoters would want you. When you were done with New York, you could pick up the phone and go anywhere, you know, go where the top guy was, you know. You know, it was really nice. I mean, that was God, that was a great era.
Who were some of the top guys in the WWF at that time, other than Bruno?
Well, when I first got in, you had you know, Bruno, but then there was Chief Jay Strongbow was real hot at the time. I mean, you got in all these towns. I mean, the people loved Strongbow, and he was a classic. And he was a sharp guy, and you know, could make crowds riot. I mean, he was great. And superstar Billy Graham was coming in, and you had classics that were already there for a while, like George Steele, I mean, Tanaka and Fuji. My dad's favorite was Baron Cicluna. But let's think of some more. You know, it was me and Gurry were kind of teaming. Haystacks, Calhoun would be coming in. You know, around. Trying to think when Andre first arrived on the scene. But me and Andre were real close. We used to travel a lot together. Let's go to Japan a lot together. I can't remember exactly when he arrived. But, you know, somewhere around that time, the Valiant brothers were really hot. You know, for a couple of years. And they classics. But trying to think of more guys. I mean, there was just so many guys, but they were in and out there. I mean, in those days, you know, you didn't go somewhere and say, well, here I am. I'm just buying a house and I'll be here for 20 years.
Right.
You know, it was like, you might be there 6 months, you might be there 8 months, and get all this publicity, and then, you know, people would see you and buy their tickets. But then after 8 months or so, you got out and you went somewhere else to wrestle because you got the publicity. In New York, you had to bring someone else in. You know, otherwise, the audiences would get bored quick. You know, and Vince McMahon Sr., to get back to him, because he was a classy character. I mean, he was a nice guy. I mean, in those days, there wasn't a code like where if you got hurt, the promoter was going to pay your bills, and you kept getting a check, and you had a contract. I mean, it wasn't like that at all. You know, and you know, Vince McMahon Sr. was always a guy that would say, "Well, you need some money," and he was a classy guy. Always had like this long furry coat, and he'd always have quarters in his hand. You know, and he'd be jingling them. Soft-spoken guy. I mean, it was a. Actually, you know, when you think about what happened, he was actually the perfect kind of promoter stereotype for that era in wrestling. And of course, when he went and his kid took over, you know, everything changed. The television changed. It went from, you know, the territories to cable, you know, to the nation, and that changed the whole. And that changed wrestling right there. You know, you know, when that nationwide cable came in, it changed everything.
Sure.
And actually, me and Bruno was really right about like the last classic confrontation of the era, because right after that, it was like the, you know, the beginning of like the Hulk and the Ultimate Warrior and Zeus and, you know, a different array of character.
Before we get into talking about the classic feud between you and Bruno, do you have any memories of your tag teaming with Tony Gurria? Because you did that for quite a bit of time.
Oh yeah. Well, Tony was. He was a nice guy, but we got along real good, and he's a little older than I am, you know. So he was always like into like, we gotta save your bloody money here, stash it here in the bloody freezer. Don't buy that. Count the loaves and not bread. Let's go across the street because gas is 2 cents cheaper. Yeah, blah 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 blah. Drive you insane. I mean, I'm walking around with the guy in the store. You know, he looks at a loaf of bread and he's got like a little computer. I says, Tony, what are you doing? Well, I gotta see how many slices I have, so how much, you know, money. Penny per slice, so I can get one more sandwich out of this loaf. Okay, dude. So, you know, and I was a little younger. You know, I just couldn't wait to buy the Harley. Boom, I'm going up and down the streets, you know, flying airplanes, and had a great old time. But it was, of course, sort of like the Odd Couple, because he was kind of neat, and I was more like Oscar Madison. You know, you come into his room, come into my room, there's cans all over the place. You know. But you know, it was a fun time. It was a time when really I was, you know, one of the advices of the old timers was always, don't get married. It's a great life for a single guy.
Sure.
And it was. It was a great life for a single guy. I should write it now.
Not everybody had the luxury of growing up seeing the feud between you and Bruno. Can you take us back there and let everybody know how it was set up and how it led to the big match? Shea Stadium.
Destiny. Actually, it was just to the point where I'm trying to think how many years. I was probably 27 years old in 1980ish or something like that. And I've been wrestling about 6 years or so, and Bruno's protege. And like anything else, you know, if you stay the same thing, you know, it gets old. I mean, here I'm 27 years old. I'm kind of getting in my prime. I've had a great entry into professional wrestling, and I've got a name at a certain level. But it's like, if I can't be Bruno's protege, forever. I'm getting older. I got to be me. So it just kind of came to where the hands of time, directed this thing, and Bruno at that time basically was announcing, and he was retired, and the people loved him so much, but they accepted that he was retired, and here was this this situation where it was time for me to do something or get a job, and it just dawned on me. I said, I have to stab Bruno in the back. I have to do something that shocks the wrestling world, because if I do, I'll have a name. It was it was a destiny telling me this. I had vision of it, and the thing was right, so I'm trying to explain it here so you can get the emotion of the time, because it was so accepted that I was Bruno's protege that actually the way I guess you could say built the thing up was I basically challenged Bruno to a match. There's a sincere. In fact, I have this interview at my house. I never thought I would see it. It was like one of the first long interviews with Vince McMahon Jr. Interviewed me because Bruno tried to, and I walked by him, and right away people said, "What the hell's going on here?" But in their subliminal subconscious, they all want Bruno. They will buy any excuse for Bruno to put back on the tights. It's an era the fans did not want to lose yet, and I remember finally doing an interview where I challenged Bruno, and I did this so sincere. I should have Oscars dangling, but I did this so sincere that everybody believed with all their heart that there would be a scientific wrestling match between me and Bruno. And even with that challenge, and even with that match that Bruno finally agreed to, nobody would have bet, no one would believe that I would have stabbed Bruno in the back. And it wasn't an easy decision to make. It was just a decision. After all these guys taught me this whole business, I realized I had to stab Bruno in the back, because even if I stabbed like Gurria in the back, so what? It's Tony Gurria. If I stab Strongbow in the back, some people may be mad, but if I stab Bruno in the back, I'll be bigger than Benedict Arnold ever dreamed of. So anyway, I stabbed Bruno in the back, and bada bing, we're gone. People were in shock. McMahons were in shock. I remember Vince McMahon Sr., and not because he didn't know what he was doing, but because wrestling was always set in a way where you had Bruno or the Chief, but he had to wrestle. He couldn't wrestle just another wrestler. He had to wrestle Ivan the Giant, or the Sheik with the fire. Or Billy Graham with the muscles. The idea of basically two wrestlers kind of like having, a feud didn't make sense if I wasn't a 300-pound Japanese guy or a 6'9", that's just the way the promotions thought. Sure. So basically, even Vince McMahon Sr., he didn't think that it was going to be as near as big as it was. If you would have asked him at the time that we fired this thing that we're going to be selling out Shea Stadium because the garden's not big enough. He would say, and that was one of the problems in my career that was not easy for me to overcome, was the fact that I wasn't 6'9", and I didn't look like George Steele, and there wasn't like some outlandish gimmick thing that I would basically just come out with tights like Bruno, and. But the thing, just the whole thing between the fact that it was such a shock, and that, pat myself on the back. I did interviews that were at the time not done. I mean, because basically every hated guy or heel or bad guy or whatever you call it was basically a gimmick. You'd scream, or you'd eat a chicken raw, or you'd smash your head through a board, or pick up a truck, or something. But you would never do an intelligent. I mean, it's almost like the gentleman Jim Corbett. It's kind of a very refined Muhammad Ali at the time, or Cassius Clay at the time. And I was really, after shocking the crowd, plus they were so excited to have Bruno back. I mean, it was just a natural. And then there was even some politics involved in getting Shea Stadium off, because, like I said, even Vince McMahon Sr. didn't really think this was, like a gigantic thing. And I remember one time we had the match, because there's more to it than there's to it, the politics, because at that time Bob Backlund was the champion. And when Backlund would wrestle, no one cared, no one came. So the money for the WWF was way down, and that's why Bruno kept coming back and agreed to come back, because he made a lot of money, but they had to pay him because Bob Backlund, no one cared. Sure. So nice guy Bob, but just the charisma of a lamp. So Bruno kept coming back at the time, but that was a biggie. And I remember I got death threats. I mean, I was warned, do not go into Little Italy in New York. I had 3 cars smashed. I was stabbed in the butt with one of those damn, those little knives the wooden thing. You slide them together with a long piece of wood, and, like $2 at the Chinese restaurant or something. I remember some guy was walking through a crowd, and all of a sudden I feel this thing like a Charlie horse, like someone kicked me right in the butt. I remember I turned around, and the cops grabbed this guy or something. I'm walking away, and when I turned around, I broke the blade off, and I didn't know it. I get in the shower, going, man, this guy kicked me in the ass. I put my hand back here. I go, what the hell's that? And I pull out a blade about this long that broke off, skinny little blades. Oh, was I hot! I've been overturned in cabs. There was a heat with that particular scenario. I mean, me and Bruno, that I can't explain. The generation of today will never understand how much emotional energy. I mean, how much people truly hated me and truly loved and truly believed, to the point where there's no music, no fireworks. I mean, you just walked out and the roof would blow out of the garden. I mean, and the energy would pass through your body in the building. I mean, the bolts and the rivets would shake, because there was so much pure warm. I mean, love and hate. Where today they'll run up and give you the bird if you jumped out. Well, back in those days, you jumped out. I mean, 200 people would kill themselves evacuating the area. There'd be bodies under chairs. People got heart attacks. I mean, it was a classy era, and the feud between me and Bruno was the hottest emotional angle that there ever was in professional wrestling. I mean, it was the end of the era, and it was the biggest heart attack causing, car wrecking, driving people crazy, best, wrestling that, situation that, ever was in that era, and will never be again, because professional wrestling just doesn't look like, at that anymore. It just not look like it that. So, that's a feeling I'm going to take to the grave someday. Too bad you guys will never know it. It was really cool.
Well, if it translates into anything, the numbers that it drew, Shea Stadium, 40,000 people. I mean, it's hard for people like us to realize the emotion of the time.
Oh yeah, the emotion, and for that time, because I mean, it just was unheard of. I mean, even to the media, which professional wrestling was always like, a stigmatism or something bad. I mean, they just, for some reason, wouldn't accept that people love professional wrestling. What's your problem? What do you care? I mean, report about it. People would go out of their way not to talk about professional wrestling back in those days. And, to do this was unheard of. I mean, me and Bruno, we kind of woke up a lot of people. And at that time, Madison Square Garden cable was going. I mean, I think back then in the early '80s, people were watching me in like Saudi Arabia wrestle. I had no idea, but it was just the right timing where people, sat up and said, "Hey, man, professional wrestling just sold out Shea Stadium. I mean, the Garden and the Forum aren't big enough for professional wrestling." And then, Madison Square Garden cable. I mean, that had these people say, "We got to put wrestling on cable." I mean, wrestling has been on TV since the beginning of TV. It's been on cable. I'm amazed it's not on network yet. I mean, I don't know what NBC, CBS, ABC, or whoever else would see is thinking, because if you don't put, I think it was almost gone a few years ago. I mean, I think network, should have bid, should still bite, missed the boat, but wrestling made one mistake. It got too vulgar. It just got too raunchy and vulgar. The wrestling went away, and all of a sudden, there's vulgarity and all kind of sexual innuendos, and instead of watching luchadors fly through the air and bodies clashing, you're watching some plastic boob blonde bimbo laying in bed, and she's mad that the guy can't do nothing. I was like, what? Click, Now try watching that with your kid. Click, and these guys are going, the hell, I'm clicking us off. We would have pushed the same guys. Click, but anyway, very interesting.
Just going back to the Bruno, what was Bruno's first impression when he had the idea of hearing his student versus him? Did he like it right away, or?
No, I mean, I don't think, if I remember right, I mean, I don't think there was like this big comeback, like he was dancing through the street. I think he thought about it, but and knowing me, I probably, kept hounding McMahon and stuff and tried to get it pushed through, and I think the one thing that really helped at the last minute, because wrestling is such a weird business, if I remember right, Ox Baker came in, because at that time I wanted to wrestle Backlund for the belt, and again with the promotion, the Bruno thing was so hot, but anyway, I wanted to wrestle Backlund for the belt. I had a hard time getting that past Vince too, and I remember Ox Baker came in, and they had some plans for Ox Baker. I mean, the guy, big guy, looked horrible. Didn't do a bad interview, for that kind of character, but it was horrible. Once the bell rang, Ox was horrible. And he was so horrible that Vince McMahon Sr. watched this match, turned around, and went, "Get the hook, oh my God." And he really didn't say it all that much. He gave guys a chance, And, but he was so bad. It's okay. And that left like next month's Garden thing wide open. So he had no choice. I think I ran right in there again. But Bruno finally went for it. But again, he taught me stuff just watching how he worked, because whenever someone's got ideas, no matter how good they are, or no matter, how great they sound, you just don't go, okay. Because what are you going to do next month? You got, the business is, we were actually running the business and making money in this business outside from a few guys. It's basically a lost art, and we can go into that maybe later. But it was destiny.
Where did we pick up the nickname "The Living Legend" for the first time?
Well, right after my feud with Bruno. As I was doing the feud with Bruno, again, all the publicity in the magazines and all that were in New York. So all the publicity, every magazine was me and Bruno, and then but Bruno was working, the bigger shows. He'd wrestle the Garden, the Civic Arena, the Boston Garden. But then I'd be going all week long. I'd be wrestling, Maria here and Ivan Putski there and Pedro Morales here. And my God, try to escape from 20,000 Puerto Ricans. Jeez. Oh, I think they're the ones that turned me over in the cab. But I could get stabbed too. But anyway. But what was I talking about? I keep thinking you guys got me thinking of more stories. All these stories probably I haven't thought about for 20 years.
Whatever comes out is fine. We talked about where you picked up the Living Legend.
Oh, the Living Legend. That's a long time ago. Anyway, the magazine, I don't know if it was Bill Apter or Napolitano's or who was writing at the time, but because Bruno at that time when he retired, but then he came back to wrestle me, he was Bruno the Living Legend, and he was the Living Legend. And then when we did our thing right after Shea Stadium, Bruno retired. Well, so I capitalized on that immediately by taking full credit for retiring the man. You know, I mean, I couldn't shoot my mouth off long enough. And the more I said I retired Bruno, the more people stabbed me and wrecked my cars, you know. But the money was rolling in, and, you know, and all the promoters would say, God, Zybsko's a pain in the butt, but he draws, damn it. God, he gets heat, damn it. You know, he's not 6'5", damn it. He's not my son, but, you know. So, yeah, so I mean, the more I took credit for retiring Bruno, you know, the hotter I got at that time, you know, for everything I did. And I remember it was one of the magazines that, you know, Zybsko retires Bruno, so he claims, you know, now the new living legend. So it just came out in all the magazines, you know, to help their stories and stuff. So I read the magazines, and I'm the new living legend. So I went, what? That would really piss people off. You can see right now, I'm 28 years old. I still had a whole bunch of hair. It was long and wavy, which was like the style in those days. And, you know, I'd be strutting around with a tan going, hey, I retired Bruno. And everybody, I mean, they still love Bruno. And that generation of fan, they still wanted to hang on to that tremendous amount of emotional, you know, satisfaction and release, you know, that wrestling gave them as fans. And so I mean, the more I claimed to be the new living legend, the more money I made, the more cars they wrecked. I got beat up. Some old guy hit me in the head with a cane. I mean, oh, it was ridiculous. But I mean, it was the wild days. It was great. But I mean, to be hated. I mean, actually, I mean, I used to have to sneak out. I used to have to tell the promoters. I says, look, I'm going on third, and then before intermission, and then I'm running out the door. And my car is parked way in the back because I couldn't walk out. I mean, I couldn't walk out into the people. I would get stoned. You couldn't do it. It was suicide. And I remember I used to, you know, a couple of times I'd rush out, like, you know, wrestling third. And after a couple of matches, they'd realize I'm rushing out. Right after my match, boom, they'd be outside. I mean, I'm laying down in the back seat. I got my girlfriend, you know, driving away. I'm going, go, go, go. And I hear people yelling, boom, I hear rocks hitting my car. And all of a sudden she stops. I go, what are you doing? It's a red light. Go, you idiot. Boom, rocks are flying. And I'd go to Boston Gardens, and I'd land, and I'd get in a cab, and one of the little guys driving me to the Boston Garden. It's like a 10-minute drive, and we pull between the two buildings and go to Boston Garden. There's hundreds of fans there, man. And all of a sudden I said, I get up and I'm locking the doors. I'm going up the window, and he's looking. He says, you okay? And I said, yeah, just make sure your door's locked. And it's just, sure enough, and as soon as we go through this building, and then they see us, it's Zybsko! Boom! Rocks are flying. I mean, bottles, you know, crashing, beer bottles crashing against the windshield cracks. This little old guy driving panics, and he tries to pull around to go up this ramp up the back into the back of the garden. Well, he misses the ramp, and now his cab is like sideways like this because two wheels are on the ramp and two are below it. And I'm like this, so the people, of course, sweet fans that they were at the time, they went over and pushed the thing over. Now we're upside down. This old guy's laying upside down. I grab his heart screaming. Oh, God. I mean, that was heat. So the more I said, so the living legend, you know, and then I just used that for really like 10 years or so. I mean, you know, people just hated my guts, and it was easy to do with my ability to talk and do the interviews, to throw in that cockiness, and because Bruno was a living legend guy, I mean, it would be like saying, hey, I retired, you know, Muhammad Ali, you know, or whoever, but it would be like the man of that era, you got him. So the more I bragged, you know, but then it stuck. Now a generation goes by, and now I'm on WCW. And I'm doing a lot of broadcasting, a little wrestling, and when Nitro got big, I mean, I was like, you know, one time I was doing all their shows. And then, you know, I was sounding like everywhere, but they were always saying, because the broadcasters were a little younger, like Shivani and them and some other guys, I just became the living legend. I mean, the wrestlers walk by, they either call me sir or they call me legend. Hey, legend! And it just became like a nickname that stuck after all them years of using it, you know, to really get people thinking. So, and now that I'm, you know, almost 50, you know, I guess it all kind of fits. So now that they've been knowing me, you know, as this for so many years, now I look the part.
Help us fill in a gap here where you went from the WWF, and we know you did some work for Vern Gagne in the also did some work down in Georgia. Leaving the WWF, where did you go next?
Well, I tell you, that was about 7, 8 years I went straight, and then it ended with the whole Bruno thing, and wrestling some other guys, Putski. Tell you a funny story about Putski. I'll just tell you a quick, but then remind me about your question.
Okay.
Because I remember that this one time we had this one riot, and I'm wrestling Putski in Albany, New York. I'll just give you a typical night of mine. This happened 7 nights a week. Here's a typical relaxing night. So I'm wrestling Putski, and then the place is crammed with people, and in Albany, I think it was an armory, classic wrestling atmosphere. The cigarette smoke, the light over the ring, and the two guys booming, the crowd just wanting blood. And I remember Putski's in the ring, and there was one guy in the front row that for some reason hated Putski. Everybody hated my guts, but this one guy hated Putski. And through the match, I'd hear him yelling, "Hey Putski, you stink!" We wrestle, and I hear, "Hey Putski, your wife's ugly." "Hey Putski, this." "Hey Putski, that." And Putski could care less what this guy is saying. And we're wrestling, and all of a sudden this guy says, "Hey Putski, you're short." Bang! Putski runs out of the ring, grabs the guy, and starts peppering him, right? So I see this as a golden opportunity. Now that the people have gone absolutely berserk, the match cannot get higher than this. If I kept wrestling Putski, this was the ultimate pop. So I jumped on the ring, grabbed something, hit Putski from behind. Well, here comes the riot, bang. So all these people come out. There's like 6 or 7 Albany police that surround me, but there's people all over. It's not roped off like nowadays with these big silver things. There's nothing. So I'm going back with the cops, and all of a sudden, boom, I feel the shot in the face. Some guy punches me, to the cops encircling me. So I get mad, so I turn around, and I grab him by the hair, and I go to hit him. But he goes to duck, but he just goes right on his knees like I still got him. So bam, I kick him in the face, and out he goes. Well, now these idiot cops, there's like 6 or 7 of them that were surrounding me. They all leave me, and they grab this guy I just knocked out. And there's like 6 guys dragging him out, hitting them with clubs, and I'm all left alone, right? So I start going berserk, because that's the only way to scare a group. So I turn around, and all of a sudden, bam, on the head I get this thing, and I look over, and some 80-year-old guy hit me with a metal crutch. And now because he hit me, he's losing his balance, and the crowd is now like pushing him over and trampling all over. I couldn't hit the old guy. So they trampled him, so I run out, I got a thing on my head like a baseball from this guy. And then we drove to the next town and did it again. But anyway, you asked me the question about...
We're talking after you rolled off from the WWE.
What did I do? Okay, so anyway, after that, I was just kind of tanked. Kind of burnt out. Not really burnt out, but I just wanted to take a break. So it was about a year I really didn't wrestle. I might have went to Japan for 3 or 4 weeks. But there was no independent. I basically found this beautiful chick, and we kind of lived together. She had a good job. I had some bread, so I just kind of just had to take some time off. I couldn't. It was just you had no normal life. You had a great, exciting life as a professional wrestler, driving around the road for years and night after night was one wild time. You'd sleep all day. You'd get up to go to the arena. Boom, people going nuts. Get a bunch of money. You come back to the hotel and you'd party if you wanted, or I used to go to bed. I got up and golf the next day. That was heaven to me, and it was just great. But it wasn't normal, So after a while, you think, well, it'd be cool to have a home, have a chick that really loves you, and and enough already, and so you try that. So I basically kind of gave that a try. It didn't work long, but. This was out in New Jersey.
New Jersey?
Yeah. I was living on Parsippany, New Jersey at the time. Anyway, it worked out great for me. We never did wind up getting married, and she was an insane Italian. So I think she's out of jail.
So I threw out 2 names there, Vern Gagne and then Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Well, there was some territories. There was at that time now it became the WWF. And Vince McMahon Jr. Was now running it, and he was giving wrestling a different twist from what wrestling was with the other promoters. The other promoters were still like Vern Gagne and the Crockett's. I think Ole Anderson was involved with Georgia, but they worked with like Dusty and the Grahams from Florida and the Crockett's and this, and maybe Fritz or somebody in Texas, where they'd work more with each other, where Vince was kind of more like the lone territory, But again, still the guys would go to New York, get the publicity and then filter back out. But Vince was into, this was like the era of the giant guy. It was Andre and Hogan's and Zeus's and I think with the big boss man back then, big guy. But he wanted like the big guys, boom. And so me and the other guys that were more of the wrestler kind of guys, we found homes with guys like Vern Gagne and the Crockett's because they liked a little more of the older school, even though it was an old school then. But they basically wanted to do more of what they did, and not what Vince was doing. Vince at this time would, like for the first time ever, would have like two guys that were wrestling each other in some video, singing songs and dancing around, which was like surprisingly like off the wall, so you had to watch it. But it was never done and wouldn't even be thought of by guys like Vern Gagne and the Crockett's and these other guys. So so I came down and wrestled for the Crockett's a little bit, and I came down and wrestled for Ole a little bit and did some things. I would just go in areas and basically work with the top guys at the time to give them a good opponent, like Tommy Rich or Mr. Wrestling 2 would be in Georgia. And they've already wrestled Abdullah and whoever, whatever. So Larry Zybsko would come in, and I'd have my feud with Tommy Rich or Mr. Wrestling 2, where we had Killer Brooks by the bell from Orndorff, and it was just different characters. I'd do some stuff in the Carolinas with Dusty because he's already wrestled everybody. So then and then after a while, then Vern Gagne, who had actually the AWA, even the years where the WWF was like the premier territory. The AWA was a real hard territory to get into. It was a real nice place to work. Vern was one of the really better payoff guys in those days, and you'd make a lot of money through the winter months, but in the summer months he wouldn't run that much. Maybe do some TVs, you make a couple of bucks, but you'd have a lot of time off and a lot of time to be at home. And it was that kind of life like a wrestler. You'd love to let me go work for Vern for a couple years so I could be home all summer. This would be great. It was a real nice place to make money and work. You wouldn't make as much money as you would in New York, but in New York you're gone 6-7 days a week. It was all year round. It was a tough lifestyle as you got older. Not tough physically, but just tough mentally because you wake up, what motel is this? What city am I in? It just got to be just a constant blend of the same, driving motel, and then it was the flying, waiting in line, flying, motel. What motel am I in? You wouldn't know what the hell city you're in after a while, and you wouldn't care.
One feud you remember, and when we talked about a few people about you coming here over the weekend, they all remembered the Killer Brooks angle. You want to give us kind of the same scenario you did with Bruno and recreate that?
God, I'm a smart guy. I never really got involved in a whole bunch. I was never like I guess like the Hulk Hogan superstar kind of guy, and I really didn't do a whole bunch. Like Flair would wrestle everybody for 20 years, but everything I did, if I came in, they were pretty much classics. Kurt Hennig with the roll of dimes, people talked about, and the Bruno thing was like the biggest of that thing, and even the latest stuff with Eric Bischoff and Scott Hall. I pumped that up, and that was all I did, brother. I was the architect, and it was when I wrestled them, that was the 2 highest buy rates WCW ever did. That could be a coincidence. I don't think so. But the Killer Brooks thing, it was a classic of what I remember at the time, because that was a time when working for George. It was okay, but it really wasn't like a hot line. I did okay because I was on the top. But if you weren't like me or Tommy Rich or Orndorff or a couple other guys at the time, it was so-so. But again, it was an easy life because you were home a lot. But Killer Brooks was an interesting character. The guy was, no one in this business is normal. Killer Brooks was a little more out there than most guys. We got along okay, but he could be he could be a trip to be with. I mean, you'll be in some restaurant, and some guy would look at him wrong. Next thing you know, Tim's gone. He's over there pulling out the guy's hair. He's got a headlock pulling out his hair. Hair is flying, and the guy horrified as he's getting his hair yanked out over dinner. So these guys are insane. But anyway, just a thing at the time where I wanted to get my hands on this belt, and of course, because actually I did an interview, and it was such a great interview at the time that I even got the Crockett's mad at me, who should have been jumping up and down for joy, because realizing how much heat I generate with these interviews. So of course, me being from New York, I'd come down here to Atlanta, Georgia, or whatever, and I'd right away. In those days, I'd still give the shot, to the South. So I come back from Stone Mountain one time, and they got Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis and someone else all carved on the side of this mountain, like a big monument to all the Confederate heroes. So I come in and I do this interview. I do this interview about Paul Orndorff and Tommy Rich and these guys, and I'm going to do this and that and get these belts. And I says, I went to Stone Mountain and saw these guys, Jefferson Davis, and I said, blah, blah, blah. I said, when I'm done with you, you guys are going to be up there like the rest of the all-time great American losers. And that just pissed off the Crockett's. I mean, they were mad. They wanted to fire me. Dusty and the was going around, no, that was good, fire him, and pissed off the South. So anyway, it was kind of some politics, again over there, because I couldn't keep my big mouth shut. But finally, we interjected Killer Brooks because just something different. I mean, if the fans, see the same old pull the leg, click. So it was just something different where, of course, I would, help with the shafting of Orndorff with Killer Brooks, who, if you looked at Killer Brooks, you'd never beat a guy like Orndorff, so that was great right there. But then I would just cockily come along and buy the belt. So now here's this cocky New York blowhard, walking around the South, knocking, blah, blah, blah. And it was just a perfect, one of the things that stick in the mind of people. It's there's a psychology, and if you do it right, it will be great, because it will make everybody excited, and they'll love it. And if you don't do the psychology, it ain't going to work. And that's the difference between like the rise of WCW and its disappearance. It's too bad. There's not too many people left that know.
You mentioned that you did a lot of the traveling with Andre.
Mm.
You want to talk about?
Oh yeah, Andre was great to travel with him. I'll tell you a couple of funny stories. A couple of stories, and you get the idea how it was. But we get off the plane, we'd land somewhere. I'm talking too long. I always like to walk behind Andre because I like to watch the people. Andre would walk through the airport, and there'd be hundreds of people coming at you as you go the other way. And everybody would look straight forward like everything's normal. But as soon as Andre passed them, their heads would turn. And walking behind Andre, you would see this. Hundreds of people walking like nothing's happening. As soon as Andre would pass, they'd all turn. And you'd have 50 people at a time, blocking the lines, all turning their heads, watching Andre walk through the airport. And he was big. He was bigger than this kid, the Giant. Now, he was bigger, and he had this afro at the time. And his head was big enough, but then when he fluffed out his hair, it looked like a tent. His hair looked like a parachute. The size was unbelievable. And, it was just the most outrageous sight. Then we get in a car, and I think me and Gurria are in one car, and Freddie, this little kid Freddie, came along. He's got a bigger old road car at the time, and he'd pick up Andre. Freddie liked to drive Andre around. He was a little referee guy. And we didn't really want Andre in our car, because Andre would break your car. Just sitting in your car, he would break it. So Andre was in the car, and me and Tony, we're driving, we're following him, and Freddie's driving. Andre's like in the back, and there was no front seat or something, so Andre did this thing. And we go up to the stop sign, and Freddie goes out a little bit too far or something. Some guy comes down the hill, and they have a little fender bender, because Freddie rolled through the stop sign. Boom. Well, Freddie gets out like the little skinny, pimply-faced kid, and this guy sees Freddie, so he gets out of his car, and he's mad that Freddie, rolled through the stop sign. So he's cussing Freddie out. And he's walking up and he's going, "You stupid son of a gun, you idiot." He's rolling up his sleeves like you're going to get the beating of your life. Well, as he's getting close, the door opens. And you see like this gigantic parachute kind of head appear that's as big as the top of the car. And all of a sudden, the head gets out, and Andre emerges, and he's towering over the car. And this guy is now seeing Andre, and he goes, "Oh my God!" And he starts rolling up his sleeves, and he walks back to his car, and he shuts the door, and he locks it. And he sits there with his arms folded. Because in those days, nobody had cell phones. So, I mean, just calling up the cops didn't work. You had to, like, wait till some idiot drove by or something. So, I saw that, and this is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. I mean, now this guy's going to go back and say, "Hey, this moron pulled out in front of me." And I was going to slap the hell out of him. But then this guy, 12 feet tall, stood up, so I didn't do nothing. Like, yeah, right. You know, I mean, it was a classic, but that stuff happened all the time. I mean, the only one time we're walking across the street in L.A., me and Andre. In California, you can't do stuff like that against the light. They get mad and give you a ticket or something. So we're walking across the street, and there's this car, and we hear this cop's voice, "Please return to the curb, sir." Andre just looks at this cop car and keeps walking, and I'm looking at the cops because, I mean, they couldn't have fit him in their car if they wanted to. And the cops just look at each other and go, "Don't even bother. Just let it go." They probably thought it was a Bigfoot in them days shaved. You know, that's what it looked like. But and he was a classic guy. We had a lot of fun.
Let's go into your AWA days. Maybe any Gagne stories that you have. If I'm not mistaken, I don't know if you were in the past or you still are. You are a son-in-law to Vern Gagne.
Yeah. I took off with his oldest daughter, and he hated me for years. That was fun at the time, trying to keep that courtship secret.
Oh, so it was a secret courtship. Okay.
Well, at the time, yeah. I mean, at the time, I mean, I didn't want anybody to know, and it's just kind of weird because it was this business. There used to be a brotherhood, and it's not like it used to be anymore. But in them days, and Kathy was such a sweet kid, and we had a great time. But it was like no matter how cool we were together, it was like, "Hey, Zybsko's going out with this Gagne." So it's either right away, I'm after the money, or trying to weasel my way in the office, blah 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 blah. And there was also a thing where you wouldn't want your daughter going out with a wrestler kind of guy, and I so it's like, we knew Vern and them found out, it would be like, "My God, you're going out with a wrestler? What's wrong with you? My God, you were raising us. You should know better. He's a wrestler. He's no good." So it was a combination of things, and it didn't last forever. I probably got a good 6-7 months out of it. And I think one time we went to a Bob Seger concert, and all of a sudden we turn around and there's, Greg and some other people sitting 2 rows behind us. I took care of that.
Okay.
Oh God! And then Vern, and Kathy would say, "Oh, let's go, let's go, kind of like go see Mom and Dad." I remember one time we're going out this boat. It was sort of like a meeting, and Vern's, Granny just sitting there and they're hating me. I was kind of sitting there trying not to smoke a cigarette, And Vern, is making me wear. Well, I had sunglasses on, but he's making me wear like this big hat, and he had a big hat because as you drove around this lake, there's lots of people hanging around the lake, and he doesn't want anybody to see it. It's business. It's no outsiders. No one should know Larry Zybsko was on the same boat with Vern Gagne because Vern Gagne was a nice guy, and I was a bad guy, supposedly, and they still shouldn't be seen together, even though I can't wrestle this guy. He's 60 years old. Anyway, he still thought like that. So we'd be like in the skies cruising down the Lake Minnetonka there somewhere, and all of a sudden you hear some guy from the shore, "Hi, Vern! How you doing?" And you could just hear Vern, "God damn! Oh, God damn!" I mean, it's just freak out. It's just ridiculous. You had to be there. Appreciate how much that really crushed Vern. Some guy, some spudhead recognized him from up there.
There was a point where you ended up winning the AWA title in a battle royal.
Yeah. Actually, I was. I remember riding. We were talking. I was down here in the Carolinas for a while doing some stuff, and then I was talking to Vern and them, and Lawler. I think Jerry Lawler at the time had Vern's belt, and I never wrestled Lawler. And Vern, our deal was, well, come on up and we'll wrestle, months of things. We didn't have a big feud with Lawler for the belt, and it would have been me and Jerry could have put on a hell of a matches. I mean, it would have been good. And so I said, yeah, that sounds good, good with me. So anyway, when I went up there, then I don't know what happened. If Lawler thought, see, again, it's the politics. Lawler might have thought, well, he's the kid's son-in-law, so now he wants to give him the belt. Bing! And he took off to New York. I think that's when, well, I don't know if he took off to New York, but when I was coming up there to do something with Lawler left and went either to New York or Memphis or, whatever. But for some reason, he took off. I still don't know why. It's too bad. We could have had a hell of a classic thing. So then, I just didn't. I think I wound up with the Bockwinkel there, and then the Saito. Yeah, Bockwinkel did some classic stuff. And everybody was expecting me to get the belt at a different time then, but that's when I had the world's greatest advice for Kurt Hennig. See, we caught him off guard.
You brought up the angle with Kurt Hennig. You want to recreate that one as well? Because that was another one that I think you were on ESPN at the time. So a lot of people.
ESPN, it was hot when it was on ESPN. It was out of the Showboat Hotel in Vegas, and every 3 weeks we'd go there and film some shows. And I used to love. I mean, every 3 weeks it's a paid vacation in Vegas. I mean, it was great. It was a great time, and the crowds were hot there in Vegas. And actually, there wasn't a lot of chanting, but the ESPN show. When I used to go out there, we had this announcer, Larry Nelson. And Larry Nelson, and you used to egg it on, but there was a few people that would sit at ringside that used to hate my guts. And they would chant, "Larry sucks." And pretty soon after, because we went back there all the time, and the show was pretty popular, and they showed it twice a day or something on ESPN, or twice a week. And Larry Nelson used to egg it on, but they started wearing Larry suck hats on the ringside. And then pretty soon it caught on where the Larry Suck chant, everywhere I went, as soon as I walked out, Larry sucks, Larry sucks. Thousands of people chanting that in unison. But it was before, it was like one of the first, before that, people never chanted stuff. People wouldn't even say suck on TV or in an arena. It was a different time of man. So I'm taking credit for the chant, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then later on, they just dropped the sucks part. But so at that time, but they were expecting me to get the belt, and we sidestepped there. But Bockwinkel and Hennig had a heck of a match. I think it was in San Francisco, and I was at ringside with the tuxedo on, looking good. And people accused Kurt of using a roll of dimes. They've never got it on camera. But, I claim, of course, I gave Hennig the world's greatest advice, and he just happened to clock Bockwinkel to right time. And the match went like 45 minutes or something, getting close to the time limit, so Bockwinkel might have been tired anyway. But people talk about that one for years. Sure. So whenever people think something's going to happen, it just can't happen. If it does, it's no fun. Sure. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, let's go into the time when you had a run with Baby Doll as your valet back in the Crockett days.
Well, it's an interesting little story of politics there. Baby Doll did some valeting before with Tully Blanchard, I guess, and some other guys, and did a good job at it. Baby Doll's a nice kid, did a good job. It was a weird time of her life, though, because must have been the biological clock. She was looking for a man, and for some reason wound up with Sam Houston. Sam Houston, very jealous guy. I remember there was a situation going on where me and Baby Doll were about to blackmail Dusty Rhodes, and we had an envelope with some very telltale pictures of Mr. Rhodes, but there was coming to a point where Baby Doll was going to give Dusty a big kiss, the kiss of death, and the promoters thought this was going to be a great symbolic gesture on the part of Baby Doll, and really put a lot of suspense in the situation. But Sam Houston was so jealous, went berserk and wouldn't let Baby Doll give Dusty Rhodes the big juicy kiss of death. Hence, Baby Doll was never seen again.
Can you explain to us why Sam Houston got such a big push back then?
When? Did he get a big push?
Yeah, he got a pretty big push for a while.
What group?
Well,
I remember him in the WWF dancing around to cowboy music.
No, before that he was saving Dusty in the ring some. Dusty would come save him in the ring.
Well, you know, Sam Houston, I mean, he wasn't a bad, I don't know what you call it, talent. It's not that he didn't have ability. He just didn't have a fearsome look. He wasn't a very, you know, he wasn't a small guy, but he wasn't like a muscular, developed guy. And the professional wrestlers, I mean, there has to be something respectable, something fearsome, something when the normal man looks at you and or sees what you look like or how big you are, or you putting a guy in a bunch of deadly holes where the average guy says, I wouldn't mess with that guy. You know, there's a mystique there. There's something that tells Mr. and Mrs. Everyday, like, this guy's not normal. And Sam Houston just wasn't a threatening guy. He just wasn't someone that you could look at and say, you know, I mean, if he got mad at me, I'd run away. It just, it's a weird thing, charisma in professional wrestling. Some guys are the toughest guys that walked on 2 feet, but if you turn on a camera, can't say nothing, can't project it, can't be themselves. And there's other guys, you know, who couldn't beat the way out of a paper bag that people look on as like Superman. And it's a fine line between, you know, what you promote, what you can get out of it, etc. And Sam Houston, you know, was okay, but he just had such a young look, a young, intimidating kind of look. You know, he couldn't hurt a fly, but, you know, and he couldn't. You know, it was just like Sam Houston's going berserk. Well, who cares?
You were telling us that you had never wrestled Jerry Lawler.
No, I never wrestled Jerry.
But you were, the promoters were talking about it, and you were telling us a story off camera.
Well, I thought we mentioned that earlier with the AWA days. I mean, the only thing I met Jerry a couple times way back working for Jim Barnett in the old Georgia days when, you know, Turner was a little station in some trailer, UHF somewhere. Very, very short time. And he was a funny guy, very talented guy with, you know, the art, and a witty guy when you listen to him. But never wrestled Lawler. Between me and him, we would have had we would have had a, I don't know what the right word is, just a dynamic, you know, build up, just in interviews alone with the way he could talk and I could talk, you know, and it would be something you just had to see. But the only time I was going to wrestle him was back in the AWA days when I first went in there for Vern. Lawler had a belt, and they were, you know, talking about me versus Lawler. And I really don't know what happened between Lawler and Vern, because Lawler took off when I was going in. And I don't know if that's the time Stan Hansen wound up with the belt for a while, or Bockwinkel probably had it 50,000 times, so I really don't know. Nick used to sleep with it. His wife had it impressioned on her stomach.
Well, we're on a couple of names and throwing them around. Everybody has a good...
The name game?
The name game with, how about with Dusty Rhodes?
What about him?
It's the first thing that comes to your mind, Dusty.
Well, Dusty is, you know, he's a unique character. Anybody that survives, you know, time in wrestling has something on the ball, and something, you know, they were smart enough to do that people like him enough or hate him enough, and they got, you know, staying power. And Dusty is a very clever guy. He's a very smart guy. He's a very witty guy. He's one of the best interviewers, you know, the business knew. I mean, Dusty could grab a mic and you know, talk into dropping money in a hat if he passed it around. You know, he was a good talker. Never blessed with a great body, but then if Dusty Rhodes had a great body, he wouldn't be Dusty Rhodes. But it was amazing, you know, in his prime, you know, for being a big guy, you know, that really wasn't a super solid guy. But Dusty could move. I mean, he could move that weight, and he could be very energetic, and he's a true classic. You know, just saying something like Ric Flair and some other guys. I mean, Flair, if you see one Ric Flair match, you've basically seen them all. Every 10 minutes, he goes over a turnbuckle. But there's something, you know, that he's done and figured out where he could do that thing over and over for 20 years, and people never really get tired of seeing it. I could go out there and stall for 50 years, never get hurt, and wouldn't get tired of seeing it.
Someone who was a broadcast partner of yours and going back to your AWA days, Bobby Heenan.
The Brain. Oh, the Brain's a classic. He's like one of wrestling's true comedians. Bobby could have his own television show where he would need no guest, no sidekick, nothing. Just have Bobby sit there, turn the camera on, and just let him talk. You know, we used to force Bobby to ride with us, not charge him any trans, just to get him in the back seat so we could drive and just listen to him do stories and impersonations. And he's just a natural crack up. And again, he's one of these guys, sharp guy when it comes to psychology. I mean, he was one of the best managers in terms of steering up a crowd. And then you see Bobby, you'll fly in and go bouncing around. I mean, the guy was a classic. I'm a big fan of Bobby Heenan's, and never ran out of stuff to say at the broadcasting for years and years. Because after 20 years of broadcasting, you kind of run out of stuff to say after a while. But Bobby's one of these guys that just one gag after another. I mean, I can't repeat some of them, but just one constant gag after another. He's one of the guys you definitely want to invite to a party. I mean, he used to come up with things, and we'd fly to Japan, and it's like a 14-hour flight, from New York to Tokyo or whatever. And as soon as they start serving dinner, because we all know as soon as everybody eats, everybody has to get up like sheep and go to the bathroom at the same time. So everybody's eating, Bobby Heenan would get up, and he'd go back to this big 747, which had 10 different lavatories. And he'd take his little pocket knife and he'd slide all the locks over, and they would all say occupied, except one. He'd leave like one unlocked. He had it down to a science. And so after dinner, there'd be about 200 Japanese all lined up, because they were doing this flying coach. They'd be all lined up from the back of the laboratories all the way to first class, just waiting in line, dying. And the Japanese are too polite to say anything anyway, because they all say occupied, even though no one's in there, and there's one that's working that takes forever. You can imagine all these people dying, and we'd be up there laughing at them. And at the same time, Heenan would be putting X-Lax or some kind of stuff in Calhoun's beer or soda or whatever, because halfway through the flight, Calhoun had to go. And the reason that he did this to Calhoun was because Calhoun weighed 600 pounds. And Haystacks could not fit into a laboratory. I mean, if it was occupied or not occupied, Calhoun could not get his body in a lavatory in the back of a plane. So you can imagine how the stewardesses had to slide curtains while you would hear these ridiculous sounds flying out of his ass, and the entire back of the plane dying of stench, as he would then straddle a blanket or something that had to be long enough to pull through his cheeks to wipe his butt. Just some of the little things that happens when you travel around with gigantic people.
Let's see, switching subject, what about Greg Gagne?
Greg Gagne, good old Greg. Greg, boy, it's tough when guys like Greg Gagne, even David Sammartino and some others. You have famous fathers, but Greg Gagne was a real good wrestler. I mean, he's a good athlete, and really did great stuff in the ring. I mean, great psychology, knows the business. He just had a tough time being Greg Gagne because he was never that big of a guy. And, when you say Vern Gagne and you're back in the 50s, Vern was a big guy for being back in the 50s. There's a big difference between, Charles Atlas of 1950 and Arnold Schwarzenegger of 1970s or 80s. I mean, the difference is ridiculous, but we all know now that it's not real. But Greg's problem in becoming really a big name was he just wasn't that big. He just looked kind of like a wiry, slender guy, which he was. And in wrestling, to get from being good to being great, there's got to be some kind of, again, back to that Sam Houston, an intimidating look. I mean, people were convinced, not that they might not be wrong, but people were convinced because of the way I did interviews and because of the way I made my wrestling match correlate with my interviews that I was the biggest ass in the world. I mean, people were convinced, even if they didn't believe wrestling, they were convinced Larry Zybsko was a real jerk. And they would, go watch me because the motivation was there. They know something is really bad with this guy. So there has to be an intimidating kind of thing. And Greg just was not an intimidating kind of guy. He was a great guy to watch fly around, but, people don't pay $29.95 for that.
Let's talk about the origins of Larry Land.
Larry Land. Oh God, that was a classic. Basically, the old AWA stuff, the ESPN days, the days when I got the AWA championship. It kind of evolved at the same time I saw that goofy movie Vacation, where they went to Wally World, and it kind of dawned on me now that the AWA has become my theme park. I mean, it was my championship. And, from the pinnacle of ESPN and all this, I could throw challenges out to Hulk Hogan, which I knew would never accept it because he can't wrestle. And I could throw challenges out to Ric Flair, which I knew wouldn't be accepted because he can't wrestle. So, I could sit there and shoot my mouth off and be whatever I wanted because it was like my theme park. So I just kind of stole a little bit from that movie where they went up to Wally World and punched the moose out, and Disneyland, and just kind of turned into Larry Land. Had a ring to it, and the way I would put it with, the rides and that first class one-way ticket to Larry Land, made it sound like a place to go if you wanted to meet the legendary heavyweight champion of the world. It kind of fit in, and then had a friend of mine in Detroit who actually wrestles a little bit once in a while. Got some write-up. He used to wrestle as Killer Canaric. I think he still does, old Dano. And did a lot with promoting rock bands. And this one rock band was going to name their album something, but they couldn't because of the copyright. So they called it Electric Larry Land after watching all my interviews. It was the Butthole Surfers.
Okay.
And they made an album called Electric Larry Land. I got one of them. With a pencil, some guy's bloody ear. But so Larry Land will live forever in CD music history.
You talked about off camera again. It was some politics that prevented, while you were the AWA champion, a match with the WCW champion.
Oh, yeah, well, an interesting little bit of historical politics at that time. Trying to compete again with what the WWF was doing. I mean, the AWA, Vern Gagne, in the beginnings of WCW, when I think Jim Herd was running it and Sting was their champion. They wanted to promote something different, something that would be really good at the time, which was when I had the championship of the AWA. They wanted me to come down, challenge, and wrestle Sting, who was the WCW champion. I guess it was probably WCW champion and not the NWA. But anyway, there was a kind of an old-timer situated with the Turner Group that, had the ear of, who was running WCW at the time. I think it was Jim Herd. I think Herd wanted to go for it. It would have been a real good idea, but there was this thinking of old school promoters of protecting your champion. I mean, your champion was basically your company. I mean, Hulk Hogan would represent the WWF, and Bockwinkel at the right time was like or Vern was the AWA champion, and Fritz Von Erich, Flair was the NWA kind of champion. But the organizations, that was like their golden calf, so that they would always make sure their champions were protected to the best of their ability. And when they wanted Larry Zybsko, who was in the business a while and had a reputation of knowing how to wrestle, and they wanted him to wrestle Sting, and Sting was a nice kid, but it wasn't a wrestler. It was more of a bodybuilder guy that painted his face and took the name of a rock star singer guy. But one of the old timers of the WCW Turner promotion kind of told her that he didn't like the idea because Zybsko, who was the AWA champion, if he wanted to, could eat up and make Sting, the new WCW champion, look really bad. And so that kind of whitewashed that idea, and it never happened. And it's too bad because it would have been a real classic confrontation, and it would have been great for Sting's career at the time. It would have been really good, but again, you get in a conflict with what should be done for the business, kind of ramming into the headstrong ideas of the remnants of old school thinking. But the times were changing then. It wasn't the territories anymore. There was really nothing to protect. It was just the business expanding and becoming nationwide.
How about an old tag team partner of yours, Arn Anderson?
Arn Anderson, Double A. Arn's one of these guys you just can't help but love the guy. He's like a lovable oaf kind of guy. And he's a great talent. I mean, I can't say nothing. I mean, I always liked Arn since the first day I saw him. He had that look. He had that movement. He's got that classic endomorphic body. And I think Arn was one of the best. I mean, probably could have been even promoted higher than he ever got. And he kind of wound up almost being known as like a tag team guy, Flair's sidekick kind of guy. And that's too bad. I think Arn could have been up there with anybody else that got up there. But mentally, Arn just liked being what he, where he was. He enjoyed that. He loved it. He loved the life, and he was great to tag team with. We had a lot of fun together, and it was a great time.
The laugh indicated there was a story there that's popped.
Well, there's 10,000 Arn Anderson stories. And things I haven't thought about in years. They all kind of like pop in there at one time. Where do I start to explain? How much fun it was with Arn. It was just one, cartoon caper after another, and the references used to have to me, because I was a different style than Arn. I was a different style than most guys, and I had to be to survive and be different. I mean, I could get in the ring when they rang the bell and flop around with the best of them, and bing, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And then, it would be, so what? We just seen that in the last two matches. The bell rang and people start flopping around. So I developed a different kind of a psychological approach style of kind of almost a rope-a-dope, And, a lot of the fans started putting a term to it called stalling. But to me, it wasn't stalling. To me, it was setting up a whole different atmosphere and a whole different look and a whole different character than the other guys who were just out there flopping around. And Arn was more of the upbringing of, when they rang the bell, you flopped around. So he used to call me Granite Man, because I used to come there and stand there. And then the guys wouldn't attack me anyway, because I just stretch them, so I'd stand there as long as I want, But I did it in a way that built the crowd up, and then when something did happen, the crowd went nuts. And, some of the guys, you just couldn't fathom that. So I remember one time we were wrestling out somewhere outside of Las Vegas in an army base outside, and there's a whole bunch of people all dressed in camouflage like shrubbery. And me and Arn are wrestling, and it's windy as hell, like a sandstorm. It's like standing in the ring, getting sand blasted in the middle of this army base, which you didn't see too much. Most of it was like the underground secret thing. And I remember I went out there, and every time the people started chanting, Larry sucked, I'd prolong it. I'd start what people would call stalling, but I would just prolong it because it was more exciting than flopping around. So as soon as I walked out there in the ring and the sand is just killing us in the eyes, I stepped out to wrestle, and the crowd started chanting, Larry sucks. As soon as Arn heard that, he started cussing at me. No! Damn it, not tonight! No! Damn it, no! Tag me, God damn! No! Oh no, I can't take it tonight! Because he knows I'm going to stand there for 10, 12 minutes. He's going to get sandblasted. Oh, he was going ape. I'll kill you! Oh, God, I used to drive him nuts. He's a classic.
Any memories of your feud with Steven Regal?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't do a whole bunch back in them days because I was really getting into the golf mode, and I just got tired of having a couple orthoscopic surgeries on this knee, one on this knee, one on the elbow, teeth put back in. I just got to the point where I just don't want to be out there bouncing around, like Arn Anderson, who's he's got some nerve damage now. And you wind up, 40 years old wrestling a bunch of guys who want to, make something of themselves. But I just didn't want it to be at my expense, and it wasn't worth it financially for me to just keep wrestling, like nobody, newcomer guys. So I really love the broadcasting, and in comes Regal. And again, it's too bad, people in charge and the way the politics were, can't see the forest through the trees, or sometimes just refuse to. it's almost like sometimes they just pout and say, I don't want to make money, I just want to do it my way. But, Regal's one of these guys that people just love to hate. I mean, Regal could almost do what I did. He could just walk out in that ring and stand there, and the place would go nuts. And I recognized this, and at that time too, that the ratings in TBS were going down, and I wanted to prove a point to some people. So me and Regal had a confrontation, and it kind of went along in some steps, but again, it was one of the things where people just had to see, and it was a classic. And Regal was great, and of course I'm a legend, and we wrestled on TBS Saturday night, and it was the toughest day. It was like May 20 something, right before summer, Memorial Day or Labor Day, whatever holiday that is, but at the beginning of the summer. And that's a very bad, notoriously bad day for ratings because no one's home. They're all driving, visiting, grilling out, swimming, drowning, whatever. So me and Regal wrestled that day, and the rating went from like a 1.7 the week before to like almost a 3, which was like more than double on the hardest day. But if people, and I told them, I says, I'm giving you proof. If people want to see something, they're going to see it, because they were making all kinds of excuses of why their business is so bad. It's not like, well, we got to like promote new guys. They're thinking as well, let's promote the same guys we've had the last 15 years. I mean, if I see Sting and Luger and Flair and Lex, anymore, I want to kill myself. And that's what the audience was doing. These people just didn't realize that, you want to see someone wrestle someone else after a while. And so I kind of tried to prove it with Regal. He was the perfect guy. And of course, after I proved it, all of them got fired, and there was a new boss in there. So,
before we get into those days, backtracking a little bit, the Western States Heritage title, I think you retired that title. Do you have any memories of your feud with Barry Windham?
I have a few. I remember it was a Long Island Coliseum Baby Doll that was involved. You want to know what I remember most about that match? I got these new pair of tights, and they were cut funny or wrong or bad. They weren't made right, but I was stuck. It's the only pair of tights I had on me that day. And when I put it on, I was horrified because it wasn't big enough and my ass was hanging out. And I remember walking into the Long Island Coliseum thinking, my God, my ass is sticking out. And I never forget that stupid feeling, and everybody thought it was such a classical match and thing. I really never looked at it as that big of a deal, the Western States. I mean, it was a good, good match, and Barry was good, and blah, blah, but for some reason people like that Western States Heritage. Does it have a classy sounding name or something? But a lot of people ask me about that, and that's really one of the things I've done that I don't really consider to be really that much of anything.
I know you have a lot of feelings on this subject. I'll just throw it out there and let you go wherever you want with it. But how about the demise of WCW?
The demise of, how much time we got?
Well, you notice we put it towards the end, just in case.
The whole saga of WCW is really, it's just like the rise and the fall. It's the agony and the ecstasy. It's War and Peace. I mean, it's a classic. Ted Turner. I guess that all goes back to Ted Turner when he was Channel 17 years ago. Little double wide trailer on some hill on UHF. Had live wrestling every Saturday. To make a long story short, because we'll run out of time with this one. To make a long story short, wrestling was one of the things that enabled his TV company to survive. The ratings were there. We used to do wrestling matches at the old baseball stadium to draw people in to watch the Braves, because the Braves would have 2 people sitting out there. And Ted Turner, not only loved wrestling and is a big wrestling fan, but also as a businessman realized people love to watch the show. This is the show giving me the ratings. This is the show letting me survive, and build up this TV out of, UHF nothing. And it did, and he was grateful, and that's why wrestling was always on TBS for 30 years on prime time, Saturday night at 6 o'clock, Saturday morning, Sunday night. For 30 years it was on there. It was part of cable television tradition, and it was some classic things going on there, and then as time went by, it got bigger, but it got bigger because Ted Turner wanted it to get bigger. And when WCW, or the NWA was engulfed by this, or the Crockett's went bankrupt or whatever, but Turner wound up buying it. There was always some static from the North Tower. I mean, like the big shots under Turner's board or whatever. You know, Ted say, I love wrestling, and then everybody would say, okay, Ted, but then half of them would go, my God, wrestling, oh my God, we hate wrestling. But Ted wants wrestling, you know, but still wrestling would, it must have irritated him or something, because no matter how much some of these big power guys didn't like wrestling, wrestling was their #1 show. And when Turner, you know, decided that Nitro, you know, he wanted more on, you know, it opened up the doors for mega money to be spent on production. And it got real big. I mean, it brought in like $200 million 1 year. Plus, not only that, it provided hours and hours and hours of programming, which would have cost millions of dollars to produce or buy. I mean, it was a gold mine. TNT, TBS was #1 cable station, you know, in the country. And it was professional wrestling that did it. Then, you know, guys got in power. Some guys didn't know. It's hard to get into everything. It's such a complex mishmash of professional wrestling trying to merge with a giant corporation. You know, professional wrestlers who are basically insane, trying to deal with a bunch of skinny, really probably anal individuals who wear suits every day and have their shoes shine. I mean, the complete opposite end of the spectrum. They didn't understand what kind of show they had. And as wrestling got gigantic and the money got gigantic, it got so big so fast that basically the people running it lost control. And too much control was given to people who didn't know. And pretty soon the inmates were running the asylum. You know, instead of the boss saying, you and you have to wrestle and be here, the guys would say, well, in my contract, it says I only have to wrestle 65 days a year, and last night was 65 days. I mean, the company was so big, the legal people didn't even realize these guys have wrestled X amount of days. I mean, who would think? You wouldn't think you've wrestled X amount of days, we've got to kiss your butt. You've got to think, hey, you're our top guy. You've got to be there for the show, for the business, for the company, with the responsibility of putting food on the guys' table who are working underneath you, and all that. I mean, the whole concept and respect for the business was kind of lost in a corporation that tried to be good, but tried to mix complete legal corporate structure with the uncontrollable, chaotic energy of professional wrestling. I mean, the two worlds just had a hard time gelling. And to make a longer story short, then came along the corporate buyouts. And Turner was a great company. And I can't say enough nice things about Ted and his company, but when Time Warner bought it over, now we're getting barraged with not only people who don't know the business, but now the control's going to people who don't like the business for some reason, where Ted Turner liked it and he could say something and it would matter. Now we got people in there that are saying, well, my wife wants to see the dog show, but professional wrestling's #1. But why? I mean, they just didn't understand that the reason it was #1 is because 45 million people want to watch it. I mean, I still can't figure it out. I still don't know why it's not on network. But along comes the corporate buyouts, a combination of the wrestlers themselves, guys who came in, a couple years earlier, got some real nice contracts, and were very thankful individuals. And it's amazing, after about a year or so, these thankful individuals became very cocky, got big heads, believed they knew what they were doing. The people who were running it were stupid enough to put clauses in their contracts that said, well, then they have the right not to do this and not to go there and only work so many days. And, the brain power would say, well, these guys have a big contract, so they must know what they're doing. Instead of realizing that, hey, the guy before me was fired because he gave this idiot a big contract. it was the most kind of absurd, lost in the shuffle of bigness, thing I've ever saw. Combined with the fact that a bunch of guys who should be very grateful got very big heads and became prima donnas, and it was a very deadly combination. And the company, in a last-ditch effort, for some strange reason, thought they figured out how Vince McMahon did it. They were told after Eric got removed the second and final time that Vince McMahon's secret weapons was the writers. In fact, I had a long talk with Mr. Bush at the time, and after he did something before even talking to a lot of people, he did it so fast I couldn't believe it, but they thought they did a good thing by stealing a couple of McMahon's writers. And I remember saying to them, well, why did you do that? These guys haven't been around. They don't know. And the reply was, well, we think they're Vince McMahon's secret weapon. And you want to know the funny part, Larry? They weren't under contract. We could sneak them away. Like, they thought they were pulling the wool out of Vince's eyes in this last ditch effort. And I says, guys, the reason Vince McMahon doesn't have them under contract is because Vince don't need them. I said, McMahon is McMahon's secret weapon. He's been there for 30 years and knows the business. He don't let these writers run it. He takes an idea, he might use it, he might change it, or he might throw it out. But you don't see the writer running around TV. You don't see the world championship belt on his writer, but it's on our writer. I mean, is something wrong with this picture here? And next thing I knew, that guy was gone. He ran for the hill. I mean, it was just a combination of 10 years with 10 different bosses, a heck of a company that tried but just listened to the wrong people and got led down the wrong roads, believed in the wrong things, and it's just too bad. It was a lot of people that spent a lot of years and made wrestling so big it was ridiculous. The only good part is, like any other good thing in life, it goes up and down. And right now, the fans are sitting back going, God, was it exciting when WCW and then the WWF, and then there was this fight for the ratings. I mean, the clash between the two every Monday night was one of the things that made it exciting. Now all that excitement's gone. So the wrestling business will survive. It's going to find another way. And someone else is going to pop up somewhere sooner or later. Or some national cable network, or in fact, whoever buys this tape can mark my words, I don't know what date it is, sooner or later. I mean, they can't think of any more dumb lawyer shows, bloody hospital dramas, detective shows. Sooner or later, wrestling's going to be on network. NBC or CBS or ABC, someone's going to pick it up. I mean, no matter what it's on, whether it's on UHF, whether it's on cable, whether it's on network, it's going to be number one if you run it right. So sooner or later, it's going to get just as exciting as it was a few years ago, but even bigger. Then there'll be 3D dimensional holographic video games where wrestlers are life-size in 3D in your living room, flying through your chandelier, laser light. Who knows? I mean, but if I were to look back 30 years ago to what I started with to where it is today, me sitting in front of some little camera talking, I never would have believed it. So another 4 or 5 years, knowledge of the world doubles every 22 months. So 2 years from now, we'll probably have the first battle royal ever off the moon.
How good did it feel in the prime of Nitro to have the Larry chants when you weren't even in-ring talent at the time?
The Larry chants were classic. I thank you all who did that, but it was a great feeling because I mean, in my broadcasting, in the situations I did with the New World Order and Scott Hall and Eric Bischoff, which the people wanted to see. I mean, we blew them away, and the buy rates were big, and the ratings were big. The people chanting, the Nitro girls were great, but the people chanted Larry. I mean, when I walked out and did it, the people chanted. I kind of like gave them all the big L, and for some reason it stuck, and it got to become a tradition of Nitro. I mean, that was the thing. We'd go out, they'd put the lights on, they'd chant Larry, I'd get up, And as soon as I sit down, then they'd all start chanting Goldberg, and I mean the building would rock, and the place was exciting. In fact, they chanted Larry so much that it ticked off the upper echelon, and they actually got not mad at me, but they were trying to convince me not to get up and acknowledge the crowd. And again, I would say, why, when you have 20,000 people in the building, obviously enjoy something and want to do it, why is your first instinct to take it away from them? And at that time it was probably jealousy. I could hear some of the guys, in the back crabbing, making comments like, well, God, the biggest hero in the place is the broadcaster, Zybsko. It's not me. I mean, it's amazing how some of these guys are crybabies. But anyway, I put my foot down and basically told them that, look, as long as the people chant Larry, I'm standing up and giving them the big L. If you don't like it, give me my release, and I'll talk to Jim Ross or Vince McMahon. Thank you very much. So they just kind of got off my back. But then about 6 months down the road, they changed shows, and I was off Nitro, which that didn't work because they chanted Larry on Thunder. And then when Russo came in, I said, looks like it's time for the senior tour. This place is going down the tubes. So I was right again, unfortunately.
And speaking of the senior tour, tell everybody about your plans with golf.
Well, I was years ago when I was young. I was torn between two worlds. Grew up on the golf course, suburban lifestyle back then, and I used to like golf. Me and my buddies would play golf all the time, and then I used to love to wrestle. Then when I got a little older and went to the wrestling frame of mind, I didn't golf that much, even though I knew the dynamics of the game and stuff. But went to wrestling, and then just played a lot of golf as time went on. The last 10 years, when I did the broadcast job, I really had lots of time, more time than I ever had. I'd work sometimes 2 hours a week. Sometimes I was doing a bunch of shows, and even though if I do like 4 shows, I'd run down and do them like all in one day, because the shows would be done. I would just voice them over. And if I did Nitro sometime, I'd take the clubs with me, golf all day, go there at night, do the Nitro, go out to the casino with a couple of the Nitro chicks. I mean, life was good. AC jazz, a little around. So it was a great time. But but now when I start getting older and I'm doing the broadcasting and I have my knees sculpted and the elbows sculpted, and I'm watching wrestling change, and I'm going, God, I never thought of falling through a table full of barbed wire when I wrestled in Shea Stadium. I must have missed something. So I decided, I'm not getting any younger, so we just kept playing more golf, and I had the time where I could golf 3-4 times a week, and I did that for about 10 years. Played in one Celebrity Pro tournament about 4 or 5 years ago, and they kind of called me at the last minute. But it was a big thrill. I didn't do bad. I came in like 21st out of 40 guys with really no preparation, and kind of nervous. But it was a thrill. And I played some senior mini tours, professional mini tours, this summer, and did pretty good. I was very proud of myself, and I'm talking to some, actually a couple of people, but actually down to one individual now about sponsoring me on the senior tour, doing the Q School in November, and giving the senior tour a shot. And the Q School is, it's not guaranteed. It's kind of, breaks. It's tough to get through. If your putts go in, you win. If not, But then they got the Monday qualifier. So for the next year, I'm kind of planning on doing lots of golf and seeing if I can get on the senior tour. Because that way, instead of getting beat up, I'll just ride around a cart looking good. People chant Larry. I'll give them all the big L. The big shots won't yell at me for it, and we'll just golf happy ever after.
It sounds like a good plan.
It's a good plan. We'll see. If I don't get on, I'll be probably falling through tables with flaming barbed wire.
Let's hope not.
Got to do something.
Okay, about wrapping up this interview, do you have any closing comments? Any things that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure you get in here?
God, we touched on quite a bit. I mean, I could go on for. I could be back here for 2-3 days, with stories. Things that pop in my mind. But God, the only thing I can say is, God, it was a great 30 years in professional wrestling. If I had my life to do again, I would have been a golfer. But I didn't, and I don't. So, I really can't. I really can't even say how much I've enjoyed being a wrestler. How much, even when the fans hated me and loved me, how great it was. Because there's some things I could never tell the fans. If I told the fans that, it would kill all the fun for them. But you never know. Larry Zybsko may be golfing, or Larry Zybsko may not be done yet. There's a couple of things in the works, and we won't talk about it right now. We'll just say keep your eye open. In professional wrestling, you never know.